Hello, everyone. We're back. We haven't done this for a while. We've not done this for like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
For many reasons. Mainly because we've had some big changes in our lives. I've been dealing with the kind of classic burnout of doing too much. Steve has changed careers, um, and has now moved to join us in the 9 to 5 rat race. How's that going, Steve?
Wonderful. Loving it.
Mm,
It's a Saturday morning
imagine
when
that.
we're recording this right now, and I don't have to work today. Like I can just enjoy the day. It's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, we're not having to record this at 2 a.m. UK time.
Yeah.
This is now just like, this can be regularly something that we do at our leisure. And we kind of wanted to touch back in with you guys and kind of talk about some stuff. And we did promise last time that we recorded that we'd be playing a game, which we still might do this year, but probably not. But it's something we want to do. But we decided that we'd like to talk about something that happened in the TTRPG space this week, something quite unexpected that we thought was worth talking about. But first, we must check back in with 2024's most hotly talked about accountabilityometer. It's Matt and Steve's TTRPG Accountabilityometer, where at the start of this year, Steve and I decided that we would pitch 10 games and we would try and play as many of them as we could. 5 each, I believe.
Mhm.
The score is currently Matt 3, Steve 2. And Steve, last time I ticked off a game, he said, "I'm falling behind. I feel like this is a one-horse race."
Yep.
Well, I'll kind of tell you all now. I've not played any more of my games. But Steve, what have you done?
I have played the rest of my games. So first of all, I played some Draw Steel, which I was super excited about back when it was announced, and when we came up with this list
Mhm.
for 2024, I was really excited about it. And about a month and a half ago, ran a 3 session play test for my group,
Mhm.
and you know what? We enjoyed it. It
Yeah,
was fun
pretty good.
and it was pretty good.
Mm.
Yeah, it was one of those things where the things that it's doing, I think, make the classic fantasy, heroes fighting monsters feel a lot smoother and a lot better than just kind of classic D&D.
Mm.
Um, and maybe we'll do a deep dive on that at some point in the future, but that was only the first of 3 games that I have played in the last few months that we've been apart.
Hmm.
um, the second one is a 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, which I just finished up a 3-part series over on my feed, playing through that,
Mm.
and quite enjoyed it. Actually, after after we had that conversation, I had a friend reach out and say that they had a physical copy that I could borrow,
Hmm.
and it's just look at this beautiful book.
Your friend is never seeing that again, Steve.
Nope, this is my book now.
That's yours now.
Sorry, Chris, this is my book now. And so he let me borrow it this summer, and I played through, journaled through, and it was a lot of fun. And it's been a while since I've done a purely journaling game,
Hmm.
and I really enjoyed it. I think that there was a lot there that if I hadn't felt the pressures of putting it on a show, that I could have spent months just kind of like delving deep into each prompt, and like each prompt could have been its own mini, novel. Um, but yeah, overall, great experience and highly recommend if you like solo journaling games.
Yeah, I've listened to the first episode of your run through, and it's Pretty good. I really like it. And if I wasn't, I'd probably get through more of it if I wasn't having to listen to my own podcast to remember what I did for my, for my Patreon only talkbacks that I've been doing,
Uh,
trying to, because I can't remember any of it. So
yeah.
I've been the most egotistical person in the world, only listening to my own voice on my commute at the gym. But finally, what else have you played? What was your last game?
My last one was Delta Green. I am in the midst of working on a solo adventure, or like playing through a solo adventure of Delta Green. I've only played a couple of sessions so far, but um, I'm enjoying that. The thing that I'm running into, and I ran into this a little bit with Thousand Year Old Vampire.
Hmm.
The reason I like playing fantasy games set in a different world or sci-fi games set in a different world is I get a little stuck sometimes on, uh, historical accuracy in the case of Thousand Year Old Vampire, or just kind of real world accuracy in the case of this Delta Green game. And I had this a minor spoiler for the Delta Green game, which hopefully I will release at some point in the future. Um, I had this idea of like in my town, there's an old state mental hospital. So I
Hmm.
was like, oh, it would be interesting to kind of set a Delta Green encounter in and around that place. Um, well, I've learned a lot about my town in one of the odd things that I didn't know. But we don't actually have a uh, like coroner's office in our county. We actually ship dead bodies to a city that's about 3.5 hours away
That
to
lucky
their
city.
coroner's office. Yeah,
They
right.
post day for them must be a joy.
Yeah.
More
So
more corpses.
in the process of playing this Delta Green game, I'm like, oh, my character is going to go visit the medical examiner, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder where that is in my city, and doing a little bit of research and found out that it's 3.5 hours away. So that changed the way that the game played. I may also be on a watch list because I've been Googling a lot about the FBI. So it's everything that it's supposed to be.
That's great. I mean, when we last spoke, and you were like you were feeling pretty despondent about not being able to get through it, and then all of a sudden you have burned me off in the last 10 meters of this 100 meter dash,
Yeah.
and I'm now staring at my list, thinking, Jesus Christ, when am I going to find time to play these last two games? I mean, I'm fairly confident I can get one of them played because it's a solo game, but
Hmm.
it's getting close to Christmas now, and convincing people to give up a couple of evenings to play Slayers could be tough. But we'll check in on this again
Yeah.
shortly. I've been playing games, yes, I have. But not not these ones off my list, which is my own fault. I've chosen to do that, and again, I'll talk about that later in the year when we do a bit of a look back at kind of what we've been up to this year. But
Hmm.
right now, we are going to talk about, like I said, something that happened this week that was very unexpected. I didn't see it coming, Steve. Did you?
I did not either. No.
Yeah. So this week, John Harper, the erstwhile designer of Blades in the Dark, decided to drop a new supplement for Blades in the Dark called Deep Cuts, it's called. And at first, when I saw it come out, I was like, "Oh, it's just like a setting book or whatever." He's doing something a bit, because they had like a Dagger Isles
Mm.
setting book, and there was something else that came out, the one that was kind of like not New Orleans, kind of a bayou type setting, that
Yeah.
were just kind of supplements. But this is not a supplement, is it? This
No.
is a reworking of some of the core rules that are presented in kind of optional modules, some extra setting stuff with some extra equipment, and most interestingly, something called the Cataclysm. Is that what it's called?
They are catalysts.
Catalyst. That's right. Yeah, the
Yeah. The
Catalyst.
cataclysm was already in there.
Ah, yeah. Sorry, the Catalyst. So, briefly, Steve, tell us like what this book contains and why it's unusual to come out like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I love about Blades in the Dark is that it has such a rich and vibrant setting, but also most of the setting is implied. Like, there are definitely chapters of the book that tell you about the different like districts of Duskfall and what you can find in those districts. But like, I think every Blades game that I have played, we start from the same starting point, but because of the nature of the game and kind of playing to find out and building the world as you go, the worlds of Blades in the Dark diverge
Mm.
quite a bit, between different groups, between different campaigns. And so one of the things that I think is really cool about this is there's just some new like innovations of like new advancements of technology within the world that you can utilize, and it's stuff that's like, oh yeah, this makes sense within the world as presented. um, there's a bunch of more information on factions, which is always great. The factions in the main book, they have write-ups for a bunch of them, but there's write-ups for some that didn't get any of those in the main rules. And in addition, there's some new factions in there.
I think there's
Um,
27 factions in this book,
yeah,
which is a
yeah,
considerable amount of material.
yeah, absolutely. Which is kind of great, because if you have played a bunch of Blades, it gives you the option to introduce some new factions into that intense world of crime and infighting, so that you aren't necessarily having to redefine factions that you've played in other campaigns.
Mm.
Um, One of the other cool things that I think about this supplement is these over 100 heritage and background options. And talking about that kind of rich, vibrant tapestry of a setting that Blades is, but also when you go to create your character, I mean, on your character sheet, you're basically given like a word. Like, are you from Akaros? Are you from Tykeros? Are you from the Dagger Isles? And there's not a whole lot of information in the book
Hmm.
about those places. So you have to kind of build a little bit of the setting as you're going, which is great if that's what you're excited about, if that's what you're into. But these give you some background options where it kind of breaks down a little bit, like, oh, if you're from the Dagger Isles, here's like 6 or 7 options of things that you could be. And it's only a couple sentences, so it's still not overly defining the world, but it is giving you the opportunity to kind of have a starting point without having to invent the world before you start playing.
Mm.
And then, like we talked about, there's the Catalyst, which is a world-shaking event which expands and alters the setting of the game. Frankly, this is probably my most favorite part of this supplement, and something that I would definitely be excited about delving into in a playthrough of Blades next time.
Mm. I
And
heard about it. I heard about a lot of this stuff on like just reading Reddit when I
mhm,
realized this wasn't just a supplement. And then people like the catalysts. It was kind of divisive from what I read, and people were saying this either changes it too much or this
yeah,
is the exact change that we've been wanting. And then when I actually read what it was, I was like, oh boy,
yeah.
that's interesting. Do you want to sum it up for us? What it is?
Sure. So it's basically that there, spoilers, that there is these fractures in the ghost field that give access to a different world
Hmm.
or different worlds. And so throughout the course of this book, there are a bunch of different references to strangers, these people who have kind of stumbled through these fractures into Duskfall, into the Shattered Isles. And the book offers a few options of different settings that it could be, and all of those are like, oh yeah, I mean, this is cool.
And the
Um,
very first one is someone from our world, like
Yeah,
someone who lived in the late
Victorian
1800s
England or
to the
whatever. Yeah,
20s, has arrived in Duskfall through
yeah,
this fracture. And I'm like, well, now that's swell, isn't it? That's
yeah.
neat.
Yep. So it sounds like you want to play a Blades game, and I know what your character would want to be.
A traumatized Victorian
Yeah.
chimney sweep. Just like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, for people who are like, well, this is, this changes things too much. It's a great thing. It's an optional rule.
Mm,
Like nothing about this book is stuff that you have to implement in your Blades game.
yeah. You don't
But
have to own this book to play Blades in the Dark. Like, this is
that's true.
completely, you can just completely play with the base game.
Yeah. But I think for other people who are excited about there is the potential to take a game that has been around for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people have played a lot of Blades in the Dark over the years, and I think this Catalyst has the opportunity to send the game in a new direction and people's experience of it in a new direction, and I think that's super exciting. And I think it'll be interesting to see if in the future it kind of it creates more catalysts, as people are like, oh, I want to have a catalyst in my game, and I'm going to do something slightly different, and it's going to introduce different pieces. Like, I don't know, it could be a whole new set of supplements or ideas that get thrown around out there to really liven up our Blades in the Dark games.
And I think that what's interesting to me is that, yes, there are these extra additional things you can tack onto your Blades in the Dark game. You can add these things, kind of sprinkle these new factions in or this new technology in as you wish. What's super fascinating to me is the systems part of this book, which
Yeah.
is a modular change to how the game works, as in, like, it has come up with, John Harper has come up with several new ways to mechanically alter the base experience of Blades in the Dark. And weirdly, Blades in the Dark, even though you think of it as a modern game, sometimes you hear people saying, well, it's kind of showing its age now. And I think you get that when you are the OG, and you get a lot of other games based on your system. Like, there are so many forged in the Dark games out there, and things move pretty quickly. Like, it's very quaint. If you ever go back and read Apocalypse World, to read, at one point that was like, reading that must have been like having someone drop a hand grenade in your lap. But like now, it just seems like a quaint bit of, like a little cool indie game that, had a lot of interesting ideas that now on the page look old because it's 10, 15 years old at this point.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating about this is we've not got a second edition of Blades in the Dark, or we've not got a revised edition. We have got this separate book, which is like $10 or something, or you can get it in a bundle. It's, as far as I know, it's digital only. I don't know if there's going to be a print version of this. And you can choose to swap out any part of the game that you like that's presented here. Like, for instance, the rules on harm have completely changed, and the rules on like leveling up or downtime have all changed. And these are all probably things that, and there is, at the end of this book, I'd recommend everyone do it, there is designer's notes. Like, there are, John writes down why he made the decisions he did, and this all comes from watching lots and lots of people play your game in ways that you never really thought of. It's really refreshing to see a designer return to something that's been out in the wild for 10 years, because he could have just written a different game that's based on the same ish mechanics and just kind of move it on slightly. But it's really interesting to see this presented as an option now.
I agree. Yeah, I think there's a lot of cool possibilities, and like you can definitely see some of the, like you were saying, some of the like DNA of games that have been designed based off of Blades, and now being like, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Let's retroactively kind of create a system that works within Blades. And then also, like, I love the idea of a designer watching people play the game and saying, oh, so that's how you're interpreting that rule, or like that's how you are being like, oh, well, this doesn't necessarily work for our table or for our game, and so we're going to do things slightly differently. And then, like you said, not revising the game where it's like, okay, well, we're going to throw out Blades in the Dark, the first edition, and now we have a second edition, and that's the preferred edition. But we've created this now. John's created this modular set of systems that it's like, you are more than welcome to keep playing the original game as it was written. If you want to try a different advancement system, if you want to try different harm and trauma system, if you want to try all of these different systems, here are some options.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love that.
I really like, and this is a really interesting thing of like, going back to your original design when you've seen other games come out that perhaps not even based on the Blades in the Dark system, not Forged in the Dark games per se, but like games that certainly cite Blades in the Dark as an inspiration, is the threat roll, which completely changes the dynamic of saying, what do you want to do? Roll the dice. Okay, here's complication, or here's what happens if you fail, or here's what happens when you succeed. Now taking the slightly more modern approach of games like Trophy Dark, where before you do something, or like the Between, also to kind of name check a game that everyone knows I like, you start the action with, well, what's going to happen if you fail? And then you roll the dice and you see if you avoid the failure. So it's kind of like working backwards. Now, this is the one thing I've seen online that people have been perhaps more divisive about than the catalysts. How do you feel about it?
I think it's cool. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the number of times that I have been running Blades and have, like, set the scene or something like that, and then we have to have that conversation of, okay, what's the position, what's the effect, all this stuff. And even the original book talks about it being like, well, risky standard is the default position and the default effect. So if you just go with that, if you just build that in as your expectation, and then you can then say, okay, well, we're gonna go with that, and now those, like, here are the consequences. Here's the um these are your options. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna slow down, or it's going to not slow down, it's going to speed up the conversation. It's the opposite of what I said. It's going to speed up the conversation, in which case I think is going to speed up gameplay, and then that gives you the option to slow down when it's a situation where the position is more dangerous. You've got a desperate position, or you've got a different effect, and you're like, all right, now let's slow this conversation down so that we can really dial in and focus on these hyper dramatic moments. And then from, for the rest of the time, we're just like, oh, make a threat roll. Let's go for it. And
Yeah.
I think the idea of the devil's bargain being made in any situation, um, I feel like that's one of those that has been introduced because that's how people play at the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I have, in many situations, just outside of picking up the dice to roll, just been like, oh, well, here's a devil's bargain. Like, just to try and convince the players that, like, well, oh, maybe you should take this bargain and go in this direction, and we'll see what happens, because it's more interesting than, them playing it safe, or, going in a direction that feels less dramatic.
Mm. And I like the idea that's baked into these new rules that you can just do something and there's just an immediate cost.
Yeah.
Because that's how flashbacks work, right? The flashbacks are incredibly powerful, but you have to take stress
Yeah.
to do it. So why not just have a thing that, is easily achievable in the fiction, and just say, well, that'll cost you coin, or that'll cost you just something on your sheet, and you
Yeah.
just get to do it, and we don't have to you do the dance of establishing the position and going through what can slow it down.
Yeah. Agreed. And it's like creating that space where you're putting the action, uh, like I would love for every player to be proactive. Most players are reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that, because if you don't, like, we're working in a shared imagination space. And so if you have a game master who's running the game, the other players at the table are relying on the game master to explain to them how and why their characters are in this situation. And so what I find myself doing a lot is trying to set up a situation and then being like, well, what do you do? And then it's like 25 minutes of, asking like follow-up questions on stuff. Like, oh, no, 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 that's over on the left side of the room, not the right side of the room. And maybe I'm just showing myself as a terrible game master who doesn't set up scenarios very well. But what I like about the threat role is that now you can be like, all right, you walk into this room and the blue coats are there unexpectedly. They pull out billy clubs and they charge over and start beating you in the face. You know, now that's a lot more uh dramatic, and like there's more actionable material there
Mm-hmm.
than, okay, well, how do you want to walk into the room? How do you, what action are you taking to explore the room? Like what method are you approaching the room? So yeah, I think putting the players kind of on the back foot a little bit has the potential to speed up the game, speed up the conversation, and also just create more excitement and more drama.
Mm. And I see Duskfall has been expanded. There is an Eastern expansion project with new districts, and I suppose when you've got a landmass that stretches out infinitely, you can just keep doing this and adding more
Yeah.
and more interest, and get to the stage where you're running campaigns in just one particular neighborhood rather than ever, expanding out into the wider city.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
because I know that you've run a lot of Blades, but in Davenar, right? Or have you run it in Dustfall as well? Because we've played it in Davenar, haven't we?
Yeah, so I ran that game in Devonar. Most of the blades that I've run has been in Dustfall.
Mm-hmm.
I had a plan to run a longer campaign in Davenar, and I might go back to it at some point. But plans change.
Yeah. But in terms of seeing the city expanded, is it something you thought was needed, or is it? Because I mean, I've only ever played Blades once, which was with you.
Yeah,
So I've never actually played in the setting that is
yeah.
the intended setting. But do you find yourself playing the same regions and districts and running into the same people, or is it big enough and wide? Is it open enough, and the descriptions of things vague enough that you can kind of mix things around? Did it need this expansion?
I don't think it needed this expansion,
Mm-hmm.
but I think similarly to what I said earlier, if you've played enough Blades in the Dark, having more options, having other places to delve into is is a good thing. Like, if you want to just, set all of your Blades in the Dark games in one district, you can do that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Blades games that I've run, we've probably used 3 or 4 of the districts more than the others.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know that I personally am like, oh yeah, I needed this expansion so that I have the room to introduce new districts, new ideas, but also like there might be games out there where they have played so much that they're like, we've gone through every street in Duskfall and now we are super happy to have this expanded area. And I think the other part of it too is that in a way it gives people permission to advance the story,
Mm.
to advance the world. And like that's not necessarily, I'm not saying that any game group needed that permission beforehand,
Hmm.
but sometimes it's nice to know that like, okay, here's the default setting, but here are some supplemental rules and supplemental options that show how the world could be expanded upon. And you can use that as a starting point, or you can go ahead and go in a different direction and create your own, uh, you know, maybe Duskfall doesn't expand in the direction that this book says. Maybe it expands out over the sea in some way, and that's unique to your setting rather than it being something that is canonical.
Mm.
Um, but I think in a lot of ways, these options kind of give people a roadmap for if you want to expand the setting, if you want to expand or change the rules, here are some ways that you can do that. And it, in a way, gives people permission for that.
Mm. I love that, and I also love some of the weirdness of some of these new factions. There is these people, I can't remember the name of them, but they run on lightning. They're like kind of parkour guys who just kind of run
Yeah.
around lightning. That is so Blades in the Dark. I love that so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Um, do you think the new rules for downtime are interesting? Because I think that when like I say, I've not played it outside of our game, but like when I've looked at downtime rules, there always seemed that potential to for it to be hanging on a roll. Seemed like there was, I don't know, almost like it would be so much more interesting to choose something here or to have options rather than just I'll roll it. Okay, I get nothing, or I don't get what I wanted.
Yeah. I think that I I kind of bounced back and forth on this while I was reading through it, because on the one hand, I just enjoy rolling dice
Mm,
and kind of having that choice out taken outside of myself, where it's like I'm going to rely on the dice to guide the story. But by the same token, there have been plenty of times where I've been like, it makes sense based on the fiction that we've created that the bluecoats kick down the door and try to arrest you.
yeah,
Now, I can't roll that unless, you have X amount of heat and you don't have that amount of heat. So it would be more interesting to just do that, but maybe do it in such a way that you're not getting the full consequences. It's like, oh, you get dragged off to jail. It's like, all right, well, maybe they kick down the door and they threaten you a little bit, but they don't actually like drag you out. Like all of these options are guidelines rather than hard and fast rules.
yeah.
And it wasn't Blades in the Dark, but it was the kind of sci-fi spin-off Scum and Villainy that I ran a like year and a half long campaign. And it's one of my favorite campaigns that I've ever run.
Hmm.
But I also realized after a couple of years of like I ran that and then through running solo games, running other games, I realized that I spent too much time adhering to the rules
Hmm.
and being like, no, you can't upgrade your ship because, you need to level up your, you need to get enough coin and enough like resources, enough cred so that you can then do this thing. So then you can spend your advancement on getting a rail gun that you attach to your ship. And I think the players were like, okay, well, like that makes sense from a mechanical standpoint that we have to spend the points for it. But like we just knocked off a, big uh, like shipyard, and like we could have stolen this weapon, and you were like, no, yeah, you can steal it, but you can't attach it to your ship until you've spent the advancement points, right?
Mm.
And I think that now I would run that very differently,
Hmm.
where I'd just be like, all right, well, let's make a long-term project, or do you want to spend enough cred to make that happen?
I think it's really interesting reading the designer's notes that John Harper has pretty much said exactly what you've just said, saying that I played a lot of games, and in my home game, this was a house rule, and now I'm kind of giving it as an option if you'd like to fold it into your games, and it's really refreshing to see a designer house ruling his own game.
Yeah, right. Because we all do it. We all create house rules
Hmm.
for the games that we play. So why not make that official, like an official part of it?
Yeah, and I think it's I suppose outside of crunchier games, that have strict turns and damage and things like that and ranges, like, we all hand wave, don't we? We like say, well, okay, I'll just give you this advancement because it makes sense in the moment rather than it happening at this time or whatever,
Exactly.
And I really like the idea that we're seeing that in this. How about the changes to harm and trauma? I very much like the changes to loadout because that seemed to be quite easily gameable.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the harm, similarly, like I think that the idea of it being something that you can invoke,
Mm.
as opposed to it being a negative penalty that's applied to your character.
Yeah, the GM can use it, can't they? Like,
Yeah,
it puts a little bit of load on the GM, doesn't it? But like the
it
GM can
does.
use it for an effect, can't they?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is like it makes it feel better from a player's standpoint,
Hmm.
because you're not looking at it being like, oh, well, I've got these, level 2 harms, and it's a -1 die for those, and so I'm rolling with 1 die instead of 2 dice. Like, part of the base game, right, is you have to make those calculations, and you have to spend resources because the world is dark and dangerous and hard. Um, and so I think this alternate way of doing harm really kind of makes things a little bit more high adventure.
Hmm.
Gives you the opportunity to be like, yeah, well, you've got these harms on you, and I'm going to introduce a complication, or reduce your effect, but you still get to roll the number of dice that your character sheet tells you can roll. And then as a player, you're not feeling like, oh, my character is weak and terrible. Um, you're like, oh, well, the odds are stacked against me. And I think that's an important distinction within game design, uh, of the idea of making the situation more dire,
Hmm.
but not making the players feel less effective. And I think that's part of what this system enables.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be really intrigued to see if going forward at some point in 5 years' time, whether we'll see a kind of collated Blades in the Dark mega version. But for now, I think it's really good to have optional modules that you can kind of
Yeah.
drop in. I love modular expansions. I think,
Yeah.
in board games and RPGs, it's the best way to do things because it really gives you the kind of the pick and mix version of it. You can just kind of take exactly what you think is interesting and use it to enhance your games
Mm-hmm.
if in the areas that you feel like it needs enhancing. So that was our brief look at Blades in the Dark Deep Cuts. Um,
It's
Felt
pretty
good.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm super excited to dive into it and explore it more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'd be really interesting to see how people take to Blades in the Dark who have never played Blades in the Dark at all, who jump in with these rules, and
Yeah.
whether or not they see it as a downgrade having to play the OG version. But we shall see. Thanks everyone. Steve, you did great, but you're sick as a dog, and I'm amazed amazed that you got through this recording before we went on, guys. This guy was really like falling apart. But that could just be world events, who knows.
It's all of it.
It's all of it. Anyway,
Yeah.
say goodbye, Steve.
Goodbye.
Bye.